Yo, yo.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, bro, nipo kwenye call hapa. Sema nipo kwenye kelele, ngoja ni mute hapa.
No worries, no worries. Let's just give it a couple more minutes what we're doing up. Bangu, mambo vipi lakini? How you doing? Yeah, I don't know if people are gonna be joining today. I'm guessing maybe ikifika past 10 hivi watu hawajajoin. Maybe we can just postpone it till tomorrow. Yeah, how's everyone doing? Za jioni. Naona bado tuko wachache hivi. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're gonna have the session kama tuko wachache, but let's just give it a couple more minutes for people to join potentially. Lakini kama watu wasipoonekana hivi, maybe we can just try postpone it till tomorrow and get the word out there more. Au sijui mnaonaje? All right. Um, yeah, I think we can just kick it off because the session is recorded. I think we can just kick it off. Halafu, hopefully it's gonna be a bit interactive in here. But yeah, once it's recorded, the other guys can check this the recorded session. Let me just try to share screen here. One sec. I just have to log out and log in one real quick. One sec.
Hello?
Halo, tunakusikia mzee.
Okay, shukrani. Nawasalimia tu.
Karibu sana. Hello, Chucha upo? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. HP nasikika?
Yeah, unasikika.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but your screen is not moving.
What about now?
Bado.
Mlikuwa mnanisikia mwanzo again?
Mwanzo tulikuwa hatukusikii. Mwanzoni kabisa tulikuwa tunakusikia, lakini sasa hivi toka uanze kushare screen hatukusikii.
Aha. Nope. Basi nilikuwa naongea mwenyewe hapa naona. But yeah, I'll just go quickly again over like traditional and digital currencies, right? So nilikuwa na explain.
Could you try and stop sharing and then share again?
Or can you guys still not see my screen here?
I can't. Labda kama wengine wanaona.
I can just
Okay.
see the cryptocurrency basics, the beginner guide, na chats behind the screen now.
Yeah, za WhatsApp.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I see. Let me try share. How about now? Can you guys see my screen now? Hello?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I can.
We can see your screen.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so nilikuwa naelezea pale like traditional and cryptocurrencies, the differences, right? So with traditional currencies, it's fiat backed and it's government issued, right? So centralized control in the meaning of BOT is the one that actually mints and regulates the money, right? It's not anyone that can actually do it. It's physical and digital, both physical in the essence that we have money that can actually we transact every day in terms of cash, but digital in the form of like hela ambayo ipo in the bank account and M-Pesa and mobile money, right? It's all regulated by the central bank, which is centralized control, right? Examples like T-Shilling, USD, Euro, JPY, etc., etc. And we have cryptocurrencies on the other side that's purely decentralized. Some are centralized in some cases that we'll see in the future. It's digital only. There's no physical aspect here, right? There's cryptographic security. And like examples I mentioned earlier, there's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, Solana, and many more, right? So we have stable coins in the form of USDT, USDC, which are stable and are really volatile. And we have like traditional cryptocurrencies as well in the form of Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera, that I mentioned earlier that are volatile. And you can see here a key aspect is volatility, right? So you can start with Bitcoin here, which is the mama of all coins. It was established by Satoshi Nakamoto, as he claims himself, in 2009, and that's when the white paper actually came, right, for Bitcoin. This is the first implementation of actual blockchain technology, where you can see, hey, blockchain technology can be used for moving funds from one area or from one person to another decentralized, where there's no middleman, there's no bank, there's no agents in the middle who can actually come in between. And I think you guys have seen the famous example where I think the guy sold a box of pizza for, I think, how many Bitcoin was it? I'm not sure. Couple million though, right? If I'm correct. But yeah, at the moment there's 21 BTC maximum supply. We have 19 million currently mined, and uses a proof of work consensus mechanism like the one Marenko was explaining yesterday. Right. So if you guys are interested in learning more about Bitcoin, feel free to learn more and check out the white paper for Bitcoin, which is a peer-to-peer electronic cash system by Satoshi Nakamoto, like I mentioned earlier. Right. And I really encourage people to learn more. So like if you haven't really dived into this paper or it's the first time getting into crypto, I really encourage like checking out this paper here. So wallets, right? So we have two wallets in crypto. We have soft wallets, we have hard wallets, right? Hard wallets include wallets like Ledger, Trezor, that actually enable you to store your cryptocurrencies in a hard wallet. So some people store it in a safe environment, some people keep it in banks, for instance, that are safe. They keep the wallets there so that no one can touch them, so they don't lose the keys. And we also have soft wallets. And soft wallets include digital wallets pretty much, right? So these include wallets like Trust Wallet, the ones that you have to hold your decentralized wallets. You have MetaMask, you have Kepler for different ecosystems, right? These are all soft wallets, but again, they're decentralized wallets, right? Non-custodial wallets. You also have, on the other hand, like custodial wallets in the form of exchange wallets. So if you guys have heard an exchange like Binance, for instance, Binance is a huge exchange all over the world. It's pretty much the biggest and most famous exchange here in Tanzania and in Africa, I would say, right? So they enable people to like hold your crypto without like worrying about the seed phrases, right? Because a key aspect with or key difference between custodial and non-custodial wallets is the fact that custodial wallets with Binance, for instance, exchanges, right? You just log in with your Gmail, for instance, you have your password there. In case you forget your password, you can always reclaim or recover your password there, and your funds are stored by Binance. In the form of non-custodial wallets, the way you register and the way you get your wallet is once you register, I mean, you open up your wallet, you get the seed phrases, which is like a bunch of like 10 words, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, random words that no one else can remember, right? They're encrypted cryptographically. And it's basically just random words that you can use as your password, right? That's your password and your seed phrase. So if you lose that, you basically lose access to your funds. And you have the same seed phrases, same way even in hardware wallets, right? So like I mentioned here, like the analogy, just think of it like a bank account for like cryptocurrencies, right? That's the wallet, right? The same way you have M-Pesa wallets, the same way you have Airtel Money wallets, the same way you have the balance on your bank account, just RDB. It's literally just a number that's just put there that reflects the actual value of money that you have, right? So if they say there's 5 million, it just reads 5 million, but like in reality, it works the same way, right? If there's any questions, guys, feel free to chime in. If there's any um, suggestions as well, feel free to chime in if there's anything to add on. Msisite mazee. Right? Right. So now in terms of like the public and private keys, like I mentioned earlier in the last slide, this is a huge aspect as well in terms of like security. I think Yana aligusia kidogo Marenga in terms of like the public keys. So the public keys is like your bank account number here, pretty much. It's shareable, right? That's the address that you can use to receive cryptocurrencies. And there's a huge difference in terms of like layer one keys and addresses and layer twos, right? I think in the future or in the next class, we're gonna dive more into layer ones and layer twos. But for instance, in EVM compatible chains, it's pretty much the same address, right? And same bank account number here, if you can just use that for reference, and it's shared, right? That's the one you can receive. So let's say Binance Mengia Paloma receive the address that you get there, they'll ask you to pick. That's kind of like the public key. Or if you have MetaMask, the address that you receive, that's the public key, right? And the private key is pretty much like the PIN or password that keeps everything secret, and you can't lose that, right? And you can't share it. So private key is where you find them on most decentralized wallets and non-custodial wallets like MetaMask, Trust Wallet. The first moment that you register, you get the seed phrases. You can also check out your public key. And once you start building applications as well and you start deploying, this private key is also going to be very important in terms of like, let's say deploying smart contracts, because that's where you're going to have to store it in like an env file and deploy it into a particular blockchain. And the env file might contain the different stuff like the private key, the RPC URL that you're going to be deploying on the chain, as well as like the API, for instance, like if it's Etherscan on like Ethereum, etc., etc. right? And like I mentioned, you're not supposed to share the private key. So I think we'll dive more into like even when we're deploying on how or what are the best practices for security in terms of like storing your private key when deployed. Because like I mentioned, it's pretty much just like your PIN or password. So think of it like una account ya benki pale and you shared your PIN or password, right? Or like you have your card number and you shared like the CVV and the date numbers, right? So yeah, in short, this is the basic difference, and make sure to store your private key safely, because if you lose this, you lose access to your fund, right? It's not like especially if it's in a decentralized or non-custodial wallet, kind of different like from uh, custodial wallets, right? So transactions, this is basically sending and receiving crypto, right? So like I mentioned here, you have your public key where you can receive, right? So let's say I have a send on Binance, I can send money and you receive, you just send me your receiver address, right? So they'll ask you on Binance, for instance, on what chain, and they'll give you difference in like cost, for instance, in transaction costs or gas fees for different chains. And I send, you receive, there's normally a transaction hash there, like I think it was Maringa that was explaining yesterday on the call, and you receive the amount there as specified, right? So you can send if it's a stable coin USDC, you can send if it's Ethereum, and most instances they should show you the reflection of the code in US dollars. So if you're sending value in Ethereum, you should see the value in the equivalent value in USD, for instance, right? So in the hash, you normally see like transaction details, sender, receiver, amount, right? And the transactions are grouped into blocks, right? And each block pretty much contains the hash of the previous blocks, kind of like how Marenko was explaining yesterday, right? And these are basically digital ledger entries that are put there in place of ensuring everything is transparent and everything is traceable, right? Because that's the beauty of blockchain. If it's open and public, in which most cases most of these blockchains are in terms of like trading cryptocurrencies, you can find them on any 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 their scan addresses like Etherscan, Basecamp, for instance, on Base, the Explorers, pretty much. That was the word I was looking for. But yeah, so we have the U2XO model, right? So this is pretty much unspent transaction outputs. And each transaction, like you can creates a new coin, right? And the transaction is pretty much like physical cash, and pretty much like how you go to a shop and spend money. You give him money, he gives you a good, and you get the change, right? But you can only pay for that good once, for instance. Once you pay him that one time, you give him 10,000, he gives you the product, you paid for that 10,000 one time. If you want to spend it for another product again, you'll have to spend another 10,000, right? And Bitcoin is pretty much the first mechanism that started the unspent transaction output model. It's pretty much the same like physical cash, like I mentioned. You spend existing bills and make new ones, and each one can only be spent once, right? This helps simplify transactions on the network, right? And it's basically pretty much used to track the ownership and transfer of funds, right? So each UTXO, UTXO represents like a specific amount of crypto that's been received, let's say, but not yet spent, right? So just think of it like a digital coin tied to a specific address with a unique transaction ID and amount. That's pretty much it. And yeah, I hope that makes sense, but the system pretty much like ensures transparency, prevents double spending, because every UTXO can only be spent once, like I mentioned, and it's different from account-based model like Ethereum, for instance, which tracks balances rather than individual transaction outputs. And I think we're gonna see more of this once we dive more into like the physical workshop, which I'm hoping is gonna be this Saturday, right? And we'll dive more into all of this, so you can create your account, public key, private key, the blockchain architecture, like we explained yesterday, like I think on the call with Arenga and Karim on the first call. So yeah, moving on to blockchain explorers. So blockchain explorers, like I mentioned earlier, is pretty much like, let's say I send money to you. If you want to see proof of that transaction, there is something called an explorer where it's open. And like I mentioned, if it's like a public blockchain, you can definitely see all the transactions there, the hashes there, like Marenko was touching about yesterday, and you can see all the data, right? So each blockchain in the world has their own explorer. Bitcoin has the explorer, Ethereum has their own explorer, Base has their own explorer, Scroll, Optimism, etc., right? Electroneum, you mentioned Near, Stellar, they all have their own explorers. They might just name it in another way, but that's pretty much the example in a nutshell, right? So the kind of information you can find on Explorer is, like I mentioned, the transaction. So if you want to make sure the transaction has actually been successful, or if it's pending, right, you can see there. So for instance, if you send money to someone, right, or if you send money to an exchange, for instance, if you send money to yourself, let's say you send money from MetaMask or a decentralized wallet to a Binance wallet, like which is yourself, which is your custodial wallet, right? But transaction may delay, and you want to make sure that, hey, all the blocks have been successful and transaction imefika and it's been successful, right? You just, the most of the times they'll say, hey, transaction here, but here's the link to the blockchain explorer, right? Transaction ID itakuonyesha pale. So once you have the transaction ID, you can check out the transaction kama imefika au bado, kama it's pending, kama there's blocks, how many blocks are left for the transaction to be completed, etc., right? Another feature of blockchain explorers you can also find is like the contract itself, the contract addresses that's been deployed, right? So I think Fika Mbeleni pia, once you get to deploying, we're gonna see like, hey, let's say we deployed an address on Ethereum, for instance, on testnet, or if it's like mainnet, you can see, because there's different explorers for mainnet, there's different explorers for testnet, right? But it's the same blockchain. So if there's a blockchain for Ethereum, for instance, they use Etherscan, you can see the mainnet one, you can see the testnet one. And with both features, you can also see the contracts, like I mentioned. So if you have a contract that's deployed, you can see it there, you can verify and publish it there. See the contract, see how it works. You can test out the read and write code as well, some aspects. But you can also see the liquidity in the contract, see how to interact with the contract as well in some aspects. So that's pretty much where you can see most information regarding a contract if it's deployed in a particular blockchain, for instance, right? And you can search transaction IDs as well and addresses. So for instance, like I mentioned earlier, you can just paste the transaction ID or hash there, and it will bring you the same output, right? So if it's like a transaction that you made, it's gonna show you up, or if it's like a contract that's deployed, it's gonna show you there. All you have to do is just search the transaction ID or the hash, or in other aspects, if it's an address, right? So if it's like address, just paste it there and check. And like I mentioned, it's used for verified transactions and tracking of funds, right? So a couple examples, there's blockchain.com, there's Etherscan, which is like the most famous one. There's Nearscan, there is Stellar Expert, there's a couple ones more, but everyone has their own explorer they use, and most of them you'd find dashboards that kind of look like this here, right? You see the transactions, you'd see how much is creation, you'd see the history, because it's public. You can search up any address, right? So I can search up Material's address here and see how much he has in his wallet, for instance, if it's on like MetaMask, right? But yeah, I don't know if that's the best practices, but like you can definitely see how much they have, how much they're spending on what they're spending, right? Each and every transaction that can be tracked, you can see it there. And now this brings us to like real world applications, for instance, in terms of like auditing and KYCs, for instance, you can see each and every transaction that's been done on the blockchain, right? So you can see all the transactions of Explorer, if it's like government costs, for instance, or if it's like project costs, how if it's like hospital costs, anything that would require like transparency, For instance, like even like donations, all that type of stuff. Yeah, no need to check your balance, bro. But yeah, it helps with like basically transparency and all the other aspects there with like trying to verify the funds, right? So I've heard a couple of use cases in terms of like the government trying to use blockchain for TRA. I think kama sikusei nilisikiaga. And I'm not sure how that one works, but it could be a private blockchain, it could be a public blockchain, but you can basically see and track, verify all these processes there, right? And again, if there's any questions, feel free to chime in, feel free to jump in. If there's anything to add on, speak on my keep up so far.
Sorry, I had a question.
Sir.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, does grouping transactions in blocks delay the transactions themselves? Like comparing to the regular fiat system, about if I'm sending money to you, I don't need to group any other transaction. I can just send you that transaction and it goes. But in blockchain technology, we have to group transactions. Does that give latency, or does my understanding of how the tech works is a bit different?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. I'll reply to that.
Yeah.
But I think kinantio na wengine wanaweza kawa na output pia zaidi hapo. Right? So with sending money, for instance, there is different blockchains and they work differently, right?
Yeah.
Batch transactions unaweza kufanya lakini unazifanya zinakuwa batched in a form of like they be rolled up, right? So utakuta with Ethereum, they allow other L2s like Base, Scroll, Optimism, they have roll-ups kwamba you can roll up transactions and zinakuwa batch, alafu wanasoma kwa pamoja. Kwa hiyo badala ya kutuma moja moja zinakuwa batch, alafu zinatuma kwa pamoja, ambazo zinakuwa zinapunguza hata gas fees, right? So I'll give an example. For instance, we have a multi-sig kwa mfano and we want to pay people kwa mfano, right? We have 30 people on our payroll. You can just initiate batch transactions there to 30 people out of scan at the same time. That's one feature. But again, so as a blockchain transaction, kwa mfano, you are building a blockchain, for instance, kama hizi tools, you can also batch up transactions, kwamba watu wakifanya transactions wasifanya moja moja, watazifanya zitaenda through, lakini mwisho wa siku sasa hiyo L2 zina roll up the transactions alafu zinaituma kwa Ethereum ambayo ndio inakuwa settlement layer and they pay like a small fee. So on the user experience layer, you just send transactions on batches, you send transactions, you send money every day inaenda at a low fee. And these guys ambao ndo kama L2s like Base, Optimism, they send the small transaction fees to Ethereum. So that's one of the reasons Ethereum is always like making revenues every year, because all these L2s they depend on Ethereum. I don't know kama nimejibu swali hapo.
Yeah, you have. But also another question on that. You said L1, which is the EVM, itakuwa settlement there. So what happens when I've handled transactions on L2 and for any reason, maybe layer 1 doesn't execute the transactions when qua client I've already said that the transaction was successful? Is there a way they handle that?
Yeah, so for my understanding, hizo hapo zinakuwa automated. So yani hiyo ni issue ambayo Base wao wanafanya au Optimism wanafanya. So wewe kazi yako ni transactions zinaenda kila siku at low gas fee, right? So wale wana transactions za 0.01, 0.001, sijui umefanya 20, umefanya 100, wanazicompile, wanaenda kufanya settlement layer kwa Ethereum, right? So which they use their, I think, POS consensus mechanism to do it. Sijui kama nimekosea hapo, ndio naomba ni correct hapo.
That's a really great question umeuliza Moses. Kwamba kuna issue moja ambayo inatokea inaitwa reorg. So if blocks are, I'm trying not to use not too much jargon, but there will be, if it's inconsistent, it will be sent back as an inconsistent transaction. So but inside the like execution layer of this L2, it does all the computation to say if this transaction is consistent. Kama ni kweli inaweza kafanyika kweli kwamba Chuchi ana dola 100,000 au anatuzingua. So within the first, the L2, there is a confirmation that happens whether this transaction is possible or not. And then sasa kwamba kusign kweli bwana fresh ndo inafanyika. That's why there's the terminology of the settlement layer kwamba okay, baridi fresh, let's disperse these funds. But then the computation still does happen on the L2 as well.
Okay, that answers my question. So.
Awesome. So I think we've covered on the explorers, right? So how you can track a transaction, right? You can track a Bitcoin transaction. You can also track a Ethereum transaction. You can track the batch transactions, zote, lakini zinapatikana kwenye blockchain explorer, right? Like Etherscan is a good example. Blockchain.com is another example. So if you want to track a transaction, for instance, like I mentioned earlier, let's say you send money from one person to another, lakini unaona kama imedelay, right? Once you send money there, they'll give you a transaction ID, which is like the hash. And all you have to do is like copy that hash kama hivi, and then you paste it kwenye your block explorer sasa, and it will show you all the details, right? So if the transaction imefika, kama haijafika bado, how many blocks have been confirmed, you know, etc, etc. Maybe the estimated time in some aspects, some blockchains they show itaonyesha input address, umetuma, alituma nani, output address, alipokea nani, amount, gas fees, all of that stuff, right? So like I mentioned, each blockchain has their own explorer and you can track it in different ways. And yeah, just to wrap up, so concluding with like the future of crypto, like I mentioned earlier, crypto has different aspects, right? There is the volatile cryptos like Bitcoin, Ethereum that are speculative, right? And speculative namaanisha kwamba you can't really predict you kind of like speculate on the price ya kesho. So utasema kesho Bitcoin is gonna be 100K or it could be 50K, for instance, right? And you have non-speculative cryptos like stable coins where you say, hey, this stable coin is pegged 1-to-1 for against a particular asset, right? So there's CDPs, collateral debt positions, where you have a stable coin that's backed 1-for-1 against the reserve, for instance. And you find this in most stable coins like Circle with USDC, Tether with USDT. I think there's the Euro coin as well. But you have organizations as well who actually mint stable coins for particular countries, like local stable coins. I think there's a blockchain like Celo, they mint local stable coins for particular countries, like I think they've done one in Kenya, Ghana, Philippines, and they have a USD one and a Euro one as well, right? But the issues with these ones is that they're not really regulated, right? So they're minted by organizations. So organizations could be like in America or Europe, and they mint the tokens for a particular country, which could raise issues such as like minting the countries or currencies or like inflation, etc., right? So that's the particular aspect with stablecoins, right? And you also have synthetic stablecoins as well to add on top of that, where you have stablecoins that are also pegged 1-for-1, but they're backed against synthetic assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. Right? And we have one like DAI. I think DAI is the most famous synthetic backed stablecoin, which is 1-for-1, but it's backed against different assets, right? But yeah, there's different use cases for crypto, right? There's different blockchains. People can build different blockchains, as we're gonna see in the future here in workshops. And in classes. There is layer one blockchains like we mentioned, like Ethereum. There's layer two blockchains uh, like Base, Optimism, ambazo ndo people build most real world projects on, right? We have other layer ones like Bitcoin, about Squeezy. They also have layer two where people also building projects on top of. So now you can even build on Bitcoin. There's other layer ones like Near, uh, Solana, Stellar, etc., etc. They have different languages as well for learning, and they have different mechanisms as well for building, right? So nikisema language, most EVM compatible blockchains use Solidity language, right? And which we're gonna get into more in the next classes. Nikisema Rust based, for instance, like other layer ones like Stellar, Near, they use Rust. Lakini saizi hizi blockchain zingine siku hizi zina uwezo wa kuwezesha, kwa mfano mtu ambayo hana experience ya Web3, but like let's say they know how to code JavaScript, they know how to code Python, they can easily build on these blockchains now. They have SDKs where you can just build using the same language that you're used to, right? So that's a huge aspect of why we're having these classes as well, so that you guys can, let's say, use the same language ambayo mna experience nayo and start learning how to build these other solutions, right? Lakini kiukubwa, I feel like the biggest thing we need to always be learning, because the potential for blockchain is like endless and we're still early. We don't really have that many real world solutions for blockchain here in Tanzania, let alone Africa. Like you'd see so many blockchain projects, but there's no really real users online. And like it's a space that's growing, there's a lot of adoption, a lot of innovation there. And the biggest thing I think we should be focusing on as a collective is trying to abstract that whole technology. Like, hey, how could we make this technology potentially easier and more accessible to all the people, right? Because hicho ndo kikubwa iko. And yeah, I don't know if there's any questions there or if there's anything to add before we wrap up the call today. Ama tuongezea hapo mzee, au vyote vimeleweka? Because if vyote vimeleweka, then tomorrow we should be starting on like smart contracts and blockchain platforms, right? Like different environments, EVM environment. We're going to start diving into Solidity more, how to set that up, fee structures, gas computation, of course. Like that's when the fun actually starts. So this whole first part is just for like blockchain basics to before the Kwanzaa last week. Hopefully we can get a lot more people joining, and we can have the physical workshops on Saturday, because we're planning to have the first one this Saturday, Apple, and hopefully we can get people joining. Actually, I think ni Thursday kama sikosei hiyo session na sio kesho. Apologies for that. So we're gonna have the session on Thursday. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything to add there before we wrap up the call, or if there's any final remarks, any questions. Okay.
Ima vipi, hauna cha kuzungumza hapo Ima? Na Bangu Mneno hatujawai kumsikia.
For real, labda ingia jitambulishe kidogo.
Yeah.
Yo bro, ni aje?
Bora
Yeah,
ni
so
Yechu babake.
Somo linakwenda, tunaelewa napata madini, niko kimya na napokea kwanza. Yeah. Mpaka hapa tulipofikia amna noma, concept nazielewa freshi. Yeah.
Yeah, hii hapa sana sana ilikuwa kwa ajili ya watu ambao like wageni kwa blockchain. Sasa sijajua kama itasaidia sana maki sijajua like kama watu wengine wanajua sana labda kwenye hizi basics tumeona hajajoin, lakini from Thursday hiyo ndo tutaanza kuingia kwenye sasa smart contracts, the basics, you know how to set up environments, jinsi ya kujenga kwanza kuandika the basic contracts na vitu kama hivyo, umeona. So yeah, personally me I'm excited and I think we should all be, and I think kuna a lot of excitement there in the future in terms of what we can achieve together, you know. So yeah, kama hamna lingine labda I think we can just call it a night, and thanks for everyone that joined. Tukutane Thursday hiyo same time, and also if you can invite more people, feel free to invite more people. I think it's much needed, and we're also trying to pull together like a resource, maybe hopefully we can get some support ili tuweze kufanya like a prize pool mwishoni, where like can build projects and the projects can actually receive like prizes, you know, vitu kama hivyo. So we're pushing for that angle. So I would encourage everyone to be motivated to join, to encourage people to join, invite other people. I think hopefully once we have more info on that, we can share it, but let's keep on building and the future is bright, guys. Thanks for everyone that joined. See y'all on Thursday. Jamaa kweli litika moyo. So first time naona unajua. I wonder who that is.
Ruksa kujitambulisha.
Hebu ajitambulishe tumsikie kabla tujaenda call hiyo msee. Wallet kama
Jao nini wote wanaume hapa.
yeah, yeah, okay. I don't know, my bro. I don't know, my man. That's how I'm say. Let's meet on Wednesday, on a Thursday, yo.